No one expected the horse to look like that. The moment she stepped into the dusty auction ring, a ripple of laughter moved across the crowd. People pointed at her coat, at the strange patterns smeared across her sides, at the streaks of color that looked more like clumsy paint than real markings. It was enough to make even the auctioneer pause before clearing his throat and trying to keep the event moving. He stood tall on the wooden platform, tapping his cane against the rail as if the sound might break the awkward tension. But the whispers only grew louder. A few folks near the front crossed their arms and shook their heads as if they had already judged everything about her. Some said she must have been someone's failed project. Others joked that a child could have done a cleaner job painting a barn wall. The comments spread through the crowd, each one a little sharper than the last. The horse flicked an ear at the noise, but her eyes stayed steady, fixed on something far off. Even with the laughter around her, there was a stillness in her that stood out. He watched from the edge of the crowd. He had come to the auction searching for a strong working horse, something dependable to help on long days. He had not planned on staying long, and he definitely had not planned on getting distracted by a horse that half the room found amusing. Yet something about her kept pulling his attention. Maybe it was the way her chest rose and fell calmly despite the noise. Maybe it was the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Or maybe it was simply that nothing about her looked accidental, no matter what the others believed. The sun filtered through gaps in the barn walls, stripes of warm light crossing the dusty ground. The earthy scent of hay, leather, and sweat filled the air, mixing with the sound of hooves shifting uneasily on rough boards. The auction had been noisy before she appeared, filled with the lively calls of buyers, the low discussions about breeding lines, and the occasional shuffle of horses moving into the ring. But everything seemed to shift when she entered. The mood changed. The crowd leaned in, not because they were impressed, but because they were curious in a way that felt unkind. The horse stood tall, her mane brushed back, but still carrying a natural wave. The colored streaks on her coat were uneven, running along her ribs and down her flank in a way that did look like someone had taken a brush to her. Some patches were faded as if rain had washed part of them away. But if it was a trick, it was one he could not make sense of. No one at the auction would waste time dressing up a horse for show. They were too practical for that, too focused on value and strength. There was something else behind the patterns, something that made him feel uneasy in a way he could not explain. The auctioneer tried to rattle off her details, but the crowd cut him off with more questions. Who brought her? Why was she marked like that? Was she meant to be a joke? The owner who had brought her stood silent at the far end, not saying a word. His hat was pulled low, his shoulders tense, and his eyes fixed on the ground. He looked like a man carrying something heavy, and he looked like he did not want to answer any questions. The man at the edge stepped closer, weaving through the crowd until he stood near the front. He ignored the laughter and focused on the horse instead. Her breathing stayed steady. Her ears turned toward him for a moment, then back toward the crowd. He could tell she was nervous, but something in her posture hinted at quiet strength. She was not shrinking back. She was waiting. A wind gust swept through the open barn door, carrying in a swirl of cold air that rustled coats and stirred the dust on the ground. The horse's tail flicked once, and the streaks along her sides caught the light in a way that made him pause. For a moment, the colors did not look like paint at all. They looked like natural shading, faint but deep under the sunlight. That brief shift made him narrow his eyes. Maybe the crowd was wrong. Before he could study her further, a group near the back began betting on how cheaply she would sell. Someone shouted a number so low it sounded insulting. More laughter followed. The horse took a slow breath in as if bracing herself. The man felt a tightening in his chest. Something about the mocking bothered him more than he expected. It was not just the cruelty of it. It was the simple fact that none of them had taken a moment to truly look at her. The auctioneer, sensing the bidding was turning into a joke, raised his voice and tried to encourage something more respectable, but the offers stayed low. The owner shifted uncomfortably and looked as if he wanted the moment to pass as quickly as possible. The horse glanced at him once, her eyes carrying a weight that made the man watching wonder what history lay between them. The man continued to watch quietly, his hands in his coat pockets, his mind racing with questions he could not voice. Why would someone bring a horse like her to auction without explanation? What could have caused those strange markings? And why did she seem so calm in a place that felt ready to tear her apart with words? He noticed a tremor run through her body, but it was not fear, it was something else. A reaction to the cold wind, or maybe to the tension in the air. Her hooves shifted softly on the dirt. The light hit her coat again, and the strange streaks almost shimmered. The man blinked, unsure if it was a trick of the eye or something real. The auctioneer called for another bid. Silence followed. Only the shuffling of boots and the quiet hum of distant voices broke the stillness. No one seemed interested in giving her a fair chance. From the way people looked at her, she was already dismissed. Another forgotten horse in a long line of animals traded for quick money. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman stepped forward from the side of the barn. She had been quiet the whole time, her presence barely noticed by the crowd. She moved slowly toward the horse, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. The auctioneer tried to stop her, but she kept walking with steady purpose. The crowd shifted to make space, surprised by her sudden boldness. When she reached the horse, the noise in the barn died completely. She placed her hand gently on the horse's neck. The mare froze for a moment, then relaxed under the touch as though she had been waiting for someone to see her without judgment. The woman's hand slid along the horse's side, touching the strange markings the others had mocked. Her eyes widened slowly. She stepped back, staring at the coat with a look that made the man's breath catch. It was not the expression of someone puzzled. It was the expression of someone who had just discovered something impossible. The crowd leaned in. The auctioneer lifted his brows. The owner tensed even more. The woman touched the horse again, her fingers tracing the streaks of color with care. She turned toward the crowd, her voice shaking slightly as she said she knew what the markings meant. Her words hit the quiet air like a spark. But before she could finish, the owner stepped forward quickly with a sharp tone that warned her to stop talking. The crowd erupted with questions. The woman hesitated. The man at the front felt his heart jump. Something was happening, something that none of them expected. Whatever truth she had uncovered, it hung in the air, heavy and waiting. The horse lifted her head, her eyes bright in the dusty light. And for the first time since she walked into the ring, the laughter stopped completely. The truth, whatever it was, hovered right on the edge of being revealed. And the man watching knew that once it came out, nothing about this horse, this auction, or this day would ever be the same again. The days after the strange incident moved slowly, almost as if time itself was unsure of what came next. Everyone in town sensed the shift, even if they could not explain it. People talked a little softer. They stayed out a little less after dark. They looked over their shoulders more than usual, even when they had no clear reason. For the first time in years, small things felt heavy. Doors that once stayed open were now being locked. Dogs that rarely barked were restless at night. All of this created an undercurrent of worry that no one wanted to name, yet everyone felt. For me, the change was impossible to ignore. I tried to distract myself with daily routines, but everything I did seemed to circle back to the same questions. Why had the stranger appeared in the middle of nowhere? How had he known my name without us ever meeting before? What was he trying to warn me about? And why did his voice carry that strange mix of fear and urgency? Each question pressed harder the more I tried to brush it aside. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night with the same uneasy thought that something bigger was happening, something hidden right beneath the surface of ordinary life. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the quiet road, the cold wind, the stranger stepping out from the shadows as if he had been waiting there for hours. The way he grabbed my arm with shaking hands. I remembered the look in his eyes, not wild but desperate. It haunted me more than anything else. It felt like he carried a truth I was not ready to hear. The more I thought about it, the more the world around me seemed to grow unfamiliar, like I had walked into a version of reality that was slightly shifted from the one I knew. Even so, I tried to keep life moving normally. I went to work, I met people, I smiled when expected. But underneath I observed everything more closely. I noticed how conversations in the town quieted whenever someone mentioned the recent strange sightings near the hills. Some claimed they saw odd lights at night. Others said they heard unsettling sounds, low and rolling like something moving underground. A few swore they felt vibrations through the soil even when no vehicles were nearby. No one wanted to panic, so most people brushed these stories away, calling them tricks of the mind or misinterpretations. Yet their eyes told a different story. They were afraid, just like I was. One evening I met with my close friend Amir, knowing he would never dismiss what I had seen. We sat on the back porch of his place, the air warm with the last traces of daylight. Crickets had already begun their nightly chorus. Amir listened without interrupting as I described my encounter again. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. He finally said he had heard something similar from another person a few weeks earlier, someone who never spoke about strange things. That made my stomach tighten. If more than one person had experienced something unusual, then this was no isolated incident. Amir said he did not know what to make of it, but he agreed that something felt off lately. He suggested we look into it quietly without drawing attention. I nodded, grateful not to be alone with the weight of uncertainty anymore. Over the next several days, we began asking questions in subtle ways. We kept our voices low. We approached only people we trusted. Most shrugged and said they did not know anything, but their reactions told a different truth. Some hesitated before answering. Some looked away. Some changed the subject too quickly. It felt like the entire town held a secret, but no one dared speak it aloud. One person, however, broke the pattern. It was an older woman who lived at the far edge of town. She rarely went out, but she was sharp and observant. When Amir and I visited her, she studied us with eyes that held a depth shaped by years of quiet thinking. After listening to us carefully, she said she had noticed unusual activity near the hills at dawn and late evening. Not normal activity either. She described figures moving silently along the ridge. She said they moved with purpose, never stumbling like hikers or wandering like lost travelers. She said it looked like they were searching for something. The way she told the story was calm, steady, and without exaggeration, which made it more unsettling. When we asked if she had told anyone else, she said no. She feared people would laugh at her or think she was imagining things. She added that the land near the hills had been acting strange, almost like something beneath it had awakened. She urged us to be careful. Her words stayed with me long after we left her home. During this time, my nights grew restless. I slept lightly, waking from half-formed dreams that slipped away as soon as I opened my eyes. Sometimes I felt like someone was standing at the foot of my bed. Other nights, I thought I heard knocking on my window even though no one was there. I chalked it up to my mind working overtime, but the feeling of being watched lingered through the day. I found myself checking the locks twice, then again before I could settle. One late afternoon, as the sun lowered behind the hills, I decided to retrace my steps to the place where I had first met the stranger. Something inside me said I needed to go back there. Amir wanted to come with me, but I felt this was something I had to do alone. The sky was soft with fading light when I reached the spot. Everything looked quiet, yet the air carried an odd energy, like the world was holding its breath. I walked slowly, scanning the area. The road seemed ordinary, but the silence around it felt thick. I crouched near the place where the stranger had stood. I did not expect to find anything, yet something caught my eye. A small piece of fabric lay tangled in the grass. It looked torn, as if someone had ripped it off in a hurry. The cloth was rough and oddly patterned, unlike anything commonly worn around here. I picked it up, turning it in my hand. It held a faint metallic scent. My pulse quickened. I glanced around again, but there was no movement. The wind rustled through the trees with a low whisper. The fabric was the only sign that someone else had truly been here. It was the first physical proof, and it made everything feel more real than ever. As I placed the fabric in my pocket, I noticed tracks in the dirt nearby. They were faint but visible. They did not look like footprints made by regular shoes. The shape was narrow, with a long indentation running through the middle. It looked almost mechanical. I knelt down, afraid to touch them, as if I might lose information just by disturbing the ground. The tracks led toward the deeper part of the woods, a dark stretch I had always avoided. I stood there, torn between caution and curiosity. The sensible part of me said I should leave, take the evidence to Amir, and come back with him during daylight. But another part of me felt a pull, like something was calling me forward. My heart thumped against my ribs. I took one step toward the woods, then stopped. A chill ran down my spine. I could not tell if it was fear or instinct warning me to wait. I stayed until the last light faded, then turned back toward town. The night settled quickly, wrapping the road in stillness. As I walked, I sensed movement behind me more than once. Every time I turned around, there was nothing but the quiet stretch of dirt road. I kept moving, my pace steady but my senses sharp. When I reached the outskirts of town, I felt slightly safer, though the weight of unanswered questions pressed harder than ever. The fabric in my pocket felt heavy. The tracks in the dirt replayed in my mind. The stranger's voice echoed again in memory, more urgent now. Something was unfolding whether the town was ready or not. I knew that the mystery went deeper than anything we had imagined. I knew the next steps would change everything. And though fear pressed at the edges of my thoughts, a quiet determination grew stronger inside me. Whatever was hiding in the shadows of the hills, whatever truth the stranger had tried to share, I was getting closer to it. And soon I would have no choice but to face it. The following morning arrived with an uneasy stillness, the kind that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I woke up earlier than usual, my mind already racing with thoughts about the fabric I had found and the strange tracks in the dirt. Even before getting out of bed, I felt that same sense of being pulled toward something I did not yet understand. It was as if the mystery was no longer just around me but inside me, urging me to pay closer attention to every detail. I finally got up and made my way through the house, trying to shake off the lingering tension. The fabric was still in my jacket pocket from the night before. I unfolded it again, studying the texture and those odd patterns. They looked like they belonged to something crafted with purpose, not something worn casually by a person walking down the road. I could not figure out what it was, but I knew it was connected to everything that had been happening. It felt like a clue that someone had dropped by mistake. Amir came by later that morning. Before I could even greet him properly, he asked if I had found anything. His tone held more worry than curiosity. When I showed him the fabric, he frowned and ran his fingers across it. He said it felt industrial but not like anything he recognized. He asked where exactly I had found it, and when I told him, he grew quieter. He said he wanted to see the tracks I mentioned, but we both agreed not to go back there until daylight was stronger. Neither of us wanted to walk into the woods when shadows still clung to the ground. While we waited for the sun to rise fully, we talked about the stories we had gathered from people in town. The pieces were starting to connect in strange ways. The sightings near the hills, the odd sounds underground, the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, the quiet fear that everyone carried. None of it made sense on its own, but together it painted a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. Amir mentioned something he had not told me before. A few nights earlier, he said he heard a loud thud near his backyard. When he looked outside, he saw a flash of light between the trees. It was quick, too quick for him to understand what he saw. He had brushed it off, thinking it was a reflection from a passing vehicle, but now he was not so sure. He said the light felt controlled, almost like it had a source that was moving with intention. Hearing that sent a cold shiver through me. If the light had been near his home, then whatever was happening was spreading closer to town. Maybe it was already here. The idea made my chest tighten. We had been assuming the unknown activity was staying near the hills, but now it seemed like the boundary was shifting. We finally set out to the woods once the sun rose high and strong. The path looked different in daylight, but I still felt a tension in the air. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches unmoving despite the soft breeze. We followed the road until we reached the exact spot where I had seen the tracks. My pulse quickened as we approached. A part of me expected the tracks to be gone, washed away by wind or covered by new layers of dust. But when we reached the place, the marks were still there, faint but recognizable. Amir crouched down and traced the shape with his fingers. He said they reminded him of something sliding rather than stepping, almost like a piece of machinery moving across the ground. He also pointed out that the pattern repeated at regular intervals, which meant it was not random. He said it was almost like something heavy had moved through the area with smooth, controlled motion. This only made the questions multiply. We followed the tracks deeper into the woods. With each step, the air grew cooler and heavier. The sounds of the town faded behind us. Even the birds seemed cautious, their chirps sparse and distant. The deeper we went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. It sat on my shoulders almost like a physical weight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there, but the path stayed empty. The tracks eventually led us to a clearing. At first, it looked like any other open patch among the trees, but the ground was disturbed in a strange way. Leaves were pushed aside in a wide circular pattern, and the soil looked freshly unsettled. Amir stepped into the center and scanned the area carefully. He pointed out faint imprints that looked like something had been placed there temporarily. The ground was compressed in the shape of a large ring, not perfect, but close enough to make the outline clear. It felt like some kind of device had been sitting there recently. We did not know what it was or why it had been placed in the woods, but the thought of it made the air thick with unease. We stood there silently for a moment, trying to absorb what we were seeing. Amir said we should not stay long. He had the same feeling I did, that something had been watching this area and might return. Before we left, I noticed something glinting between two rocks. I bent down and pulled it free. It was a small metallic piece, smooth and cold. It looked like part of something larger. Maybe it had broken off whatever machine or device had been here. Amir inspected it with a puzzled look. He said it was unlike anything he had seen in person. It felt advanced, almost too precise. We tucked the metal piece away and headed back toward town. The further we walked, the more the tension eased, but the questions grew louder. What kind of machine had been there? Who was operating it? What were they searching for? And why in our small town? When we reached Amir's house, we sat outside and spread out everything we had found, the fabric, the metal piece, our notes from conversations around town. We tried to connect the clues, but every path led to another question. Nothing felt complete. It was like trying to build a picture with missing pieces. In the middle of our discussion, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the older woman who lived at the edge of town. She never sent messages unless it was important. She said she had seen movement near her property again, but this time she noticed something new. There were shadows that did not match the shape of the trees. They shifted with intention, like figures moving in the dark. She asked if we could come by before sundown. Her tone carried worry and urgency. Amir and I exchanged a glance. We knew we had to go. Her property was closest to the hills, and if anyone had insight into what was happening, it was her. We gathered everything quickly and made our way to her home. When we arrived, she greeted us with a nervous smile. She led us to her yard and pointed toward the tree line. She said the figures had appeared there earlier in the day, moving along the same path repeatedly. She said they were too far to identify, but they moved with purpose, almost like they were searching for someone or something. We asked if she had heard anything too. She nodded and said she had heard a low humming sound that did not match any machine from town. It reminded her of metal vibrating softly. She said it came in short bursts, then faded. She had tried to record it, but every time she raised her phone, the sound stopped. This only deepened the mystery. Whoever or whatever was behind all this was careful, calculated, and always one step ahead. It felt like we were chasing shadows while the real truth stayed hidden behind them. As the sky dimmed, she urged us to leave before dark. She said the woods changed at night, that the air carried a different kind of silence. We did not argue. We thanked her and headed back toward town, but even as we walked, I felt the weight of her words settle over me. The conflict that had been forming in the background was now stepping into the center of our lives. The unknown presence was growing bolder. The town was being drawn into something it was not prepared for. And the more clues we found, the more dangerous the truth seemed. Yet despite the fear, something inside me felt a quiet determination. Whatever was happening, I needed to understand it. I needed to know why the stranger had warned me. I needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. The conflict had become personal, and even though the answers were still hidden, I knew I was getting closer to the center of it all. The walk back to town felt longer than it should have. The trees behind us seemed to lean closer, as if listening to our footsteps. For a moment, neither of us spoke, each lost in thought. The sun had dropped behind the hills, and the sky was turning a deep shade of gold. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting those strange shapes the older woman talked about to appear in the fading light. Nothing moved, but the silence was thick. When we reached the main road, Amir slowed his pace. He said we needed to think carefully before taking another step forward in this mystery. He reminded me that something or someone was watching the town and likely knew we were looking for answers. His words were calm, but I could hear the concern under them. I told him I understood the risk, but the truth was already pulling us in too deep for either of us to turn back. We agreed to take all our findings to the abandoned barn on the edge of town. It was quiet, hidden, and sturdy enough to give us a place to think. It had once belonged to a farmer who moved away years ago. People rarely went near it, which made it the perfect place for us to gather everything without drawing attention. We carried our notes, the fabric, and the metal piece, and headed there before the sky turned fully dark. Inside the barn, the smell of old wood and dust filled the air. Soft beams of fading daylight filtered through the cracks in the boards. We settled at the long workbench and spread everything out. The fabric lay between us, its odd patterns almost glowing under the slanted light. The metal piece sat just beside it, cold and sharp. Both items looked out of place in this old barn, a strange mix of the past and something that felt like the future. Amir picked up the metal piece again and held it near one of the lanterns. He said the edges were too clean, too perfect. He said that only high-precision tools could shape metal like this. It reminded him of parts he had seen in research labs when he visited the city years ago. The idea that someone could be using such advanced tools in the middle of our quiet town made the situation feel even heavier. I asked him what he thought the device in the clearing was. He said he had a theory, but he hesitated before explaining. He believed it might be some kind of scanning instrument. He said the pattern in the soil suggested it rotated or shifted repeatedly. If that was the case, it might have been searching for something underground. The thought sent a chill through me. Why would anyone need a scanning device in the woods? What could they possibly be searching for under the soil? We tried to match the clues again, and for the first time, we found a connection that made both of us pause. The older woman had mentioned shadows that moved with purpose. My tracks had shown something sliding instead of walking. Amir's strange light seemed controlled, and the clearing showed signs of a device used deliberately and repeatedly. Each clue pointed to people who were not just passing through but working toward a plan. A hidden plan. One that required secrecy. We were still deep in discussion when the first sound reached the barn. It was faint, almost like a soft pulse. Amir fell silent and held up his hand. The sound came again, steady and rhythmic. It reminded me of the humming the older woman mentioned, only this time it was closer, much closer. The barn walls absorbed most noise from outside, but this sound slipped through, growing clearer by the second. We moved to the window carefully and peeked outside. Night had settled over the land, turning everything into a stretch of dark shapes. At first I saw nothing, but then something glided across the open field in slow, deliberate movements. It did not look like a person walking. It moved too smoothly, too evenly, like someone carrying something heavy but balanced. I felt my heartbeat pick up, each beat hitting like a soft strike against my ribs. Amir whispered that it might be connected to the device we saw. If someone had returned for it or placed another one nearby, this could be part of the same operation. Whatever was happening in the woods was now pushing toward the outskirts of the town. The distance between the unknown and our homes was shrinking. We ducked down as the figure paused near the barn. I held my breath, feeling my pulse in my throat. The humming sound became stronger, then faded slowly as the figure moved again, eventually disappearing into the distance. Only after everything fell still did we stand up again. The tension in the room was heavy enough to feel in my shoulders. We knew we could not leave this for the sheriff. He would not believe a word of it without proof. We needed something solid, something undeniable. Amir suggested following the figure from a distance the next night. He said if we could see where they were taking the device or where they were working, we would understand what they were searching for. I hesitated, knowing how risky that was, but I also knew he was right. If we backed away now, we might never get the answers. and the town would stay in danger without even knowing it. Before leaving the barn, I tucked the fabric and metal piece into my bag. I felt responsible for them now. As we stepped outside, the crisp night air brushed against our faces. The sky was scattered with stars, but the land below felt quiet in a way that did not bring peace. We parted ways at the crossroads, agreeing to meet the next night. Amir told me to be careful on my way home, and for the first time I felt like I truly needed the advice. Walking alone through the open fields made every sound seem sharper. A distant howl, the crunch of frost under my boots, the rustle of dry grass. I felt the eyes of the night watching every step. When I reached home, I locked the door behind me and stood in silence, listening for anything unusual. Only after several long minutes did I finally relax enough to set my bag aside. Before going to bed, I examined the metal piece again. Under the warm lamp light, it looked even more unusual. I noticed faint marks along the side, almost like symbols or coded lines. They were too small to read clearly, but too precise to be accidental. It made me wonder who created it, and what kind of knowledge they had that the rest of us did not. The next day felt like a long wait. Each hour seemed heavier than the one before. I tried to keep myself busy helping around town, but every thought drifted back to the figure in the field. When the sky finally dimmed again, I felt a mix of dread and determination. It was time to meet Amir. We gathered near the edge of the woods under the soft silver glow of the moon. Amir carried a small flashlight, but we agreed to use it only if necessary. The cold air wrapped around us, and the wind carried faint scents of pine and earth. We waited in silence at first, listening for the humming sound. It came slower this time, a pulse that traveled across the fields, steady and careful. Our eyes adjusted to the darkness, and soon we saw a shape moving between the trees. It glided the same way as the night before. We followed from a safe distance, keeping to the shadows. Each step filled me with tension, yet something in me also felt stronger. The search for answers was pulling us toward something big. The figure moved deeper into the trees, guiding us along narrow paths and open patches. We followed quietly, careful not to snap a twig or disturb the fallen leaves. The humming grew louder until we reached another clearing. And there, at the center, stood a larger structure, a device shaped like a tall metal column with faint lights pulsing along its sides. My breath caught as I watched the figure examine the machine. This was not a simple tool. It was more advanced than anything our small town would ever see. The device sent out small waves that brushed through the air like invisible ripples. It felt like we were standing at the threshold of something far bigger than we had imagined. The tension built in me like a rising tide. We were closer than ever. The truth was right in front of us, but we still did not know what it meant. I could feel that the next steps would pull us straight into the heart of the conflict. And whatever came after would change everything. The path to the climax had begun, and there was no turning back. The moment we saw the tall device glowing softly in the clearing, it felt as if everything we had pieced together finally stood in full view. The soft hum rising from the machine seemed calm, not dangerous, almost like a signal meant to guide rather than harm. The figure who had been operating it moved with steady, practiced motions, unaware that we were tucked behind a fallen log watching every detail. For a few seconds, neither of us breathed. The light from the device washed over the grass, revealing patterns on the ground that looked like a map drawn by nature itself. Lines in the soil formed curves and shapes that pointed toward hidden areas beneath the surface. Amir leaned closer to me and whispered that the machine was scanning something underground. It made sense then. Everything we had seen over the past days was part of a search. The figure finally stepped back from the device and removed their hood. What shocked us was how familiar the face was. It was a man many in town thought had left years ago. He used to work in the old mining office before it shut down. Folks talked about him now and then, saying he had moved far away for better work. Yet here he was, standing under the cold night sky, working with equipment more advanced than anything the town had ever seen. His expression was focused but calm. He looked around the trees as if making sure nothing had disturbed his preparations. For a moment his face softened, and I saw a hint of something like relief. Then he began packing tools into a small case, carefully storing each piece. Whatever he was doing, he had almost finished. Amir motioned for us to move back quietly. We needed to understand the full truth before approaching him. Once the man left the clearing, we stepped out and walked around the device. It stood taller than either of us, made of polished metal that reflected the faint light of the moon. The pulsing lines along the sides faded until the device settled into silence, as if it had completed its final task. Amir knelt near the ground where the lines had formed. He brushed away some loose soil and uncovered a faint symbol carved into the stone beneath. It looked old, not new, ancient even. He said it must have been part of something long buried, something the man was trying to locate without disturbing the land. That explained why the track slid instead of stepping. The machine had wheels that moved gently across the ground, leaving smooth trails behind. We talked in quiet tones, trying to make sense of it all. It became clear that the man was not trying to harm the area. He was searching for something hidden below the forest floor, something important enough for him to return after all these years, something he believed was still here despite the passing time. We followed the path he took back toward the open field. The cold air wrapped around us, but instead of fear, I felt a growing sense of purpose. When we reached the road, the man stood waiting as if he already knew we had been behind him. His gaze was steady, not angry, just accepting. He asked us to walk with him to the old shed near the fence, saying he owed us the truth. Inside the shed, the light from his lantern filled the room. He placed his case on a crate and sat down, folding his hands. He told us he never left town because he wanted to. He had been following the traces of an old document he found in the mining office before it shut down. The document described something buried deep in the ground long before the first settlers arrived. A structure or a vault of some kind. The clues were scattered and the search had taken him many places. But everything pointed back to this land. The symbols we found in the clearing matched the drawings in the document. The fabric belonged to a protective bag he once used to carry sample stones. The metal piece was part of a tool he designed. He explained that he kept everything secret because people might misunderstand his intentions. He feared the land might get torn apart if the search became public. So he worked alone, coming only at night to avoid drawing attention. He admitted the flashing light Amir saw was the machine calibrating. The strange movement patterns were caused by the wheels that allowed it to move with minimal impact. The older woman's sightings were of him carrying the scanning rods he used before building the larger device. Every strange detail we collected had a simple explanation, but without context, the mystery had grown larger than life. Listening to him eased the tension I had been carrying for days. He was not a threat. He was a man driven by purpose. Someone who cared enough about the land to protect it even while searching beneath it. Amir asked him whether he finally found what he was looking for. The man smiled, a quiet, peaceful smile, and said that the vault he had been searching for was not filled with gold or rare minerals. Instead, it held seeds. Seeds preserved by a group long forgotten. Seeds meant to restore landscapes after harsh winters or long droughts. He believed the seeds were sealed underground as a gift for future generations. And after years of searching, he finally confirmed their location. He said he wanted to share the news with the town so everyone could decide what to do next together. That alone told me he wanted unity, not secrecy. We walked him back to town the next morning. The sun rose gently behind the hills, painting the sky with warm shades of orange. The fields sparkled with frost, but the air felt lighter now. When we arrived, a small crowd gathered, drawn by curiosity after seeing us return with someone many thought had vanished. He stood before them and explained everything with honesty. At first, people were unsure, but as he spoke, the mood shifted. Folks listened with open minds and warm hearts. He described the seeds, the vault, and the importance of treating the land with respect. People exchanged looks of hope, hearing that the valley might once again grow richer soil and stronger harvests. The older woman who had warned us about shadows stepped forward and said she always believed there was a bigger purpose behind what she saw. Her words softened the last bit of doubt in the crowd. The following days brought a sense of unity across the town. People offered their support. Some volunteered to help create a long-term plan to protect the site. Others suggested building a small center to preserve the history behind the vault. For the first time in a long while, The town felt alive with shared purpose and promise. Amir and I visited the clearing again with the man, guiding others who wanted to understand the discovery. Seeing families walk carefully across the grass, listening to his explanations, filled me with a sense of pride. We had helped uncover the truth and protect something precious. And in doing so, we formed a bond none of us expected. Weeks passed, and the vault was opened under careful supervision. The seeds were stored in a safe place until experts could study them. The forest remained peaceful, no longer burdened by fear or mystery. The humming machines and late-night searches ended. What remained was a renewed appreciation for the land and the people living on it. In the end, the greatest treasure was not what lay underground, but the way the discovery brought hope, unity, and understanding to the whole town. The conflict turned into connection, and the mystery turned into a story we would share for years. And as I stood in the clearing one last time, letting the cool wind move through the trees, I felt grateful that a simple journey for answers led us all toward a future brighter than we expected. The story settled into a happy ending, grounded in truth, community, and the quiet strength of the land we called home.